Warm good afternoon to our respected resource person, Professor Dr. M. Gandhi, sir, our respected Director of Legal Studies, Professor C. Chokkalingam, sir, principals, deans, and HODs of various law institutions, faculty members, and the dear participants of this faculty development program. I am Kritika Dhanapal, Assistant Professor of Law and one of the co-conveners of this FDP program, going to be the moderator of this session. On behalf of the Chennai Dr. Ambedkar Government Law College, Pudupakkam, our beloved principal, Professor Dr. Gauri Ramesh ma'am, and the organizing team, I welcome you all to the day 4 afternoon session of this FDP program. This FDP is organized in such a manner that our respected principal, Professor Dr. Gauri Ramesh madam, wanted the best of best minds to be brought before the audience and provide a rich, informative, and knowledgeable feast to everyone present here. And yes, madam's dream has come reality today, and this program is successfully going on in a full swing like a marathon, and we are halfway through it. Now, I call upon our dear principal and the convener of this FDP program, Professor Dr. Gauri Ramesh ma'am, to give her welcome address. Please, ma'am.
Thank you, Kritika. Good afternoon to one and all present here for the second session of the third day of the FDP program. On behalf of the Directorate of Legal Studies and Chennai Dr. Ambedkar Government Law College, Pudupakkam, it gives me immense pleasure to have the honor of welcoming the resource person for today, a stalwart in the field of international law, respected Professor Dr. M. Gandhi, sir, Dean, VIT School of Law, Chennai, and his beloved proud student, Professor Dr. C. Chokkalingam, sir, the Director of Legal Studies, who has joined the session today to once again listen to his professor's lecture. Welcome you, sirs. Professor Gandhi, sir, is a legal luminary when it comes to international law, constitutional law, and environmental law. His administrative caliber is always been appreciated in all his workplaces, and no doubt, the fine quality of students of the VIT School of Law stands a best example for that. His academic interest is such that he encourages all his faculty members to pursue many research-oriented programs nationally and internationally. Sir conducts various moot competitions every year in a very diligent manner to cull out the best mooting spirit amongst the law students across the nation. Sir, I take this opportunity to wholeheartedly thank you for readily accepting our invite and encouraging us in all our academic activities. Sir's topic for today is methodology of teaching international law. And dear participants, do not miss even a minute in this engaging and enriching session ahead. Thank you once again, sir, and thank you, everyone. Over to you, Kritika. Unmute, Kritika.
Please unmute yourself.
Sorry, ma'am. Sorry. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your welcome address.
Yeah.
So now I invite the person, though who reaches great height, but always wish to be the student of a research person, Professor Dr. M. Gandhi, sir. The person who stands as the backbone for all the events conducted by our college and who keep on encouraging us to further come up with such events. I now request our respected Director of Legal Studies, Professor C. Chokkalingam, sir, to give his felicitation address. Please, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Kritika.
Thank you, sir.
A very warm good afternoon to all the participants. I'm really very proud to take part in this program, invaluable program. Today, one of my great mentors is going to share his experience, especially in the field of international law. I don't want to take much of your time because I know everyone is very eager to hear from our great legal luminary, Dr. Gandhi. But I want to mention two things here. When I was a student of Dr. Ambedkar Government Law College, Puducherry, when I was doing my final year, Dr. Gandhi taught us international law. Only because of his teaching, I was having so much interest and pressure in studying international law. He was the reason behind for me pursuing my studies further. Because of his teaching, I joined International Law and Constitutional Law in Department of Legal Studies in our reputed Madras University. Not only that, to become a law teacher, my inspiration was none other than our Dr. Gandhi. On behalf of the Directorate of Legal Studies also, I wholeheartedly welcome Dr. Gandhi for this wonderful program. A few words about our professor. He is a very good educationist, an administrator. Almost he visited all the countries throughout the world. So he's not only an administrator, but after relinquishing his office in the Ministry of External Affairs, he was very eager to join the law students. So under his able stewardship, the VIT School of Law is marching and achieving leaps and bounds. I hope our Professor Gandhi will be sharing almost his experience. Of course, within a time of 1.5 hours, it will be very difficult. But anyhow, he will be sharing his invaluable experience with our participants. I once again wholeheartedly welcome our Professor Dr. Gandhi for this faculty development program. I thank all the organizers for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your felicitation address. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us amidst your busy schedule, sir. Thank you once again. Now I take the privilege in welcoming our speaker of the session, respected Professor Dr. M. Gandhi, sir, Dean of VIT School of Law, VIT Chennai, and introduce sir to our audience. I should definitely record the fact that it was really a challenging task for us to limit sir's achievement in a single slide. But we have tried our level best to at least mention 10% of his achievement. And I was unfortunate that I was not a student of Gandhi, sir, but I was fortunate enough to start my initial teaching career under his guidance. And I'm very sure that his journey will be quite motivating to every budding professional. So sir hails from Subramaniapuram, Vasudevanallur, Tenkasi district. He is an economics student from Sri KGS Arts College, Madurai University, and he obtained his MA degree in political science and public administration from Madurai Kamaraja University. Sir secured his bachelor's degree in law from Dr. Ambedkar Government Law College, Pondicherry, and master's in law and PhD from University of Madras. Sir has more than 35 years of experience in handling diverse legal issues in the capacities like practicing lawyer, law teacher, legal advisor, international negotiator, administrator of the legal division, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. Sir was a professor and executive director of the Center for International Legal Studies, Jindal Global Law School, Haryana. It is very important and exciting to note that Sir has performed various legal and diplomatic tasks that were undertaken for Government of India, which includes being the Joint Director, Joint Secretary, Legal Advisor, Ministry of External Affairs, Senior Director of the Legal and Treaty Division, Counselor and Legal Advisor in the Permanent Mission of India to the UN, Member Secretary to the High Level Committee of Government of India, Government of India's Special Advisor to the Government of Mauritius. Sir served as one of the counsels in the Indian legal team led by the former Attorney General of India, Mr. Suli J. Saurabhji. Sir has represented India in the 6th Legal Committee of the United Nations. Needless to mention that Sir has given several legal opinions and advice in the administration of government departments. Sir's role of honors include the recipient of various awards and prizes for its outstanding performance, both in academics and profession. Few include L.C. Miller Gold Medal Award, A.L. Mudaliar Prize, Madras University Research Fellowship, UNITAR Fellowship, UNITAR Visiting Fellow to Columbia Law School, etc. He is experienced in negotiation of treaties and agreements, and among them, the most notable one includes the Maritime Agreement between China and India took place in November 1996. He represented India in multilateral forums and international institutions as leader, member of the Indian delegation, notably to the UN General Assembly. Some of the important meetings include of the state parties to the UN Convention on the Law of Sea, New York, in the year 2002 to 2006, Annual Assembly Meeting of the International Seabed Authority, Kingston, Jamaica, 2002 to 2016. He was an elected member of the Financial Committee of the International Seabed Authority.
Close it, Kritika, because the time
yes, sir,
factor,
really.
much of the time is taken on this.
Yes, sir, really, there are a lot of things that would be inspiring a dear participants. That is the main reason that we wanted to highlight. And yes, finally, sir has published various specimen publications and served as legal expert panelist in various international meetings, conferences. Sir has presented n number of papers and delivered lectures in various forums. So I welcome him to enlighten us on the topic, methodology of teaching international law. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for the Director of Legal Studies, my good old student and a good friend, and Professor Gauri Ramesh, Principal of the college, which is age-old one. And she is a good friend of mine. And Kritika, she introduced fabulously, because it looks like a flattery for me. Although, you know, it is an occasion that they have to explain all these things, but that is not necessary, taking into consideration that after all, we are going to discuss something among equals. So that is a very important thing I want to share. Now, let me go to my topic today, and I can just share a slide. Thank you very much for giving an opportunity to talk to the teaching community. And the topic I slightly modified, the reason that it will be more viable to just do like that. And I stated here as my topic, tools and methodologies of teaching international law. See, international law, the very content of international law is changing rapidly on everyday basis. And you know, just if you see in the 60s, they had only one textbook, that is J.N. Brierley, and that book contains only 128 pages or something like that. And later on, you have very bulky volumes, but much of them are not relevant for our purpose. Now, what is important for teaching international law is, first, you must understand what international law is. And you must, again, fully understand what the content of it is. And very often, you know, we have problems with international law, because we say that it is law, but at the same time that it is not obeyed by states, and there are violations. Just because a violation is there, you can't say that there is a non-existence of law. Violation would indicate that there is an existence of law, that's all. So the point is that when you take international law as a specimen, better not to compare with the municipal law, because the municipal law has a different method and municipal law application is different, but international law has to work within the multiculturalism, multilingualism, and in fact, it has to work among all races and nationalities. So there is a problem to reconcile the issues which are all conflicting in the making and the implementation. So if this is the content of the, the international law that a teacher is going to, in fact, teach in the classroom, it is important for him to involve constantly into the research. because the research is an integrated part of teaching. If you are not doing enough research, you will not be able to teach international law. That is the state of affairs today. Now let me go to my slide. Now there are preliminary questions. One is the content of international law, that is what to teach. And the content is not the same for all places. The content would be different. It's all depends on whom you teach. Then you decide that whom you teach, then comes how do you teach. Because the content as well as the persons you are going to address, and these things would decide how you teach. Because sometimes you will be teaching to an adult learner, sometimes you will be teaching very experienced people international law. So methodologies that you use and the depth depends on who you teach. Assumption on prior knowledge of international law of students is an essential factor, whichever group that you teach. See, the international law is in fact taught in different settings to different group of people. Judges and law clerks, practicing lawyers, undergraduates and law students, members of media, diplomats including UN diplomats, legislatures and legislative staff, corporate executive, high school student, military, general public, and again, you can see that law professors, what we have been doing now. Almost all settings, I had an opportunity to interact. Judges, no doubt for High Court judges, and I was in the Judicial Academy. Twice or thrice, I had an opportunity to talk to them. Practicing lawyers, yes. To undergraduate law students, so many years. Members of the media, sometime. Diplomats, including UN diplomats, many times, because I was on the faculty of the Indian Foreign Service Institute. Then the legislature and legislative staff, I had an occasion to teach them the legislative department of the parliament. So if you just see, then military also. So if you see that, what is the prior knowledge about international law of these people, that always matter. Because you don't want to commit something excessive, first thing. And you don't want to just take to them to the theoretical framework if it is not needed. And if some people are interested only in just looking certain problem areas which are relevant for their practice area, then you will teach that. But as a law teacher, our, that the teaching area is a bit onerous. There are reasons for that. See, for example, the international law can be taught only in an interdisciplinary fashion. For me, law itself is an interdisciplinary subject. That is what I used to talk to them. And then how it is the interdisciplinary fashion you teach it. Normal teaching itself is interdisciplinary in nature, if you are a right teacher for international law. If you are not, the interdisciplinary level teaching, you don't understand, you can't teach international law. First, say legal theory and philosophy, international relations, international politics, international institutions. Because the law flows in the making and its implementation into all these areas. So it is, happening invisibly. But when all these things put together and orchestrated, the law is formed or law is implemented. Then there is what we have to teach, in which way we have to teach. There is a comprehensive teaching. What is the comprehensive teaching? Because, in this classroom, you have to teach in a comprehensive way. Because, when I was a student, it was taught to me 1 year international. Now you teach one classroom, only one semester. And some people, they do it in one trimester. Okay. So what happens is that your time frame is important, but at the same time, what is your content? What to teach is important. The comprehensive teaching would mean that you are not leaving anything the persons, your students are supposed to know. Then what to do? That's why I said research is an integral part of teaching, because this without research, you will not be able to update the information, and it is fast evolving. When it is fast evolving, then you have to make it happen in such a way that, you know, when every updation, it needs to be factored every time you go for teaching. So you can find that there is a sea of change since 1990 on teaching of international. Why? Because if you see that after 1990, what happens is the theoretical orientation to international law was given much more. Like, you know, the cosmopolitanism, trial, third world approaches to international law, critical approaches to international law. All these things have occurred only after 1990. And before that, if you see that only recognition, nationality, succession, territory, only these kind of things that primarily occupied the field. And those things are important, but those things are not much more important today because most of the things are settled. So the content of law and the emphasis over the period has changed. Now, and you have to teach the theory as well as doctrines, because, you know, certain people say that it's an old fashion to just rely only upon doctrines, and you have to give more and more emphasis on theory, and the doctrines are not much important. So we see always a problem with legalism and realism. And the legalism, where, you know, in the pink in the slide, you can see that it is a typical positivist definition of international law. International law comprises a system of rules and principles that govern the international relations between sovereign states. That's all. It is a typical positivist definition. And in addition to that, now they add two words that sometimes, you know, it relates to the people and it relates to, again, because the human rights part has been added, and the NGOs. Only these two things are added along with institutions and corporations. If all the four things are added, it would become a modern definition. But principally, this definition is a basic definition of international law. Now, when you talk about the legalism and realism, the positivists, they look law as a rule, that's all. And realists look law as an official behavior. That means what? If a rule is there in the rule book, but at the same time, the subjects of law, they are not behaving what has been just given in the rule. So the problem is, very often you can find, you know, there are questions even in the classrooms, and that, you know, the teachers themselves are unable to answer this point because they are all confused that why you can say that is a law, and in fact, law is respected in its violation than that of adherence. That question would come in. That's why I said that if you bring in a kind of definition of law in a positive fashion, then you can find that whatever violation, which are all punctuated in all the official behavior of the states. But you should not look law in that fashion because it is completely a different law than that of municipal law. So you must understand all the time, the teachers, international law will have its own inherent limitation. It is a law of a different nature, that you must understand that. So then what is the theory? The theoretical part, you can find that our theory is a mixture of unarticulated formalism. That means what? It is referring to some texts. That means what? Whether they are referring to the treaty format, or they are referring to some judgment or a decision, or they are referring to some of the resolutions from the international organization. So it is an unarticulated formalism you can find in the theory. But the realism is text is not matter, state practice matters. So one is the text, the other one is what the behavior is. Then political realism, very often, the people just come and say, states are nasty, break the rules. I'm asking question, are they not individuals in a municipal system break the rules? When you have a system, that too you say that very cohesive system and certain rules are broken, do you say that the law is honest? No. Then how can you say that the states are nasty, break the rules, therefore you can't see a law there and law is again honest? You can't argue that way. And you have to make it very clear to your students when you are, in the class they are asking. But you must yourself confident about this, because the nature of law you are dealing with is completely something different from the municipal law or the national law of a state. You can find another theory, that the decolonizing international law. The decolonizing international law is an idea where, is put forth by the third world approaches in international law and critical approaches to international law, wherein they always, they say and criticize the present law is the Eurocentric law. Therefore, Eurocentric law is need not to be made. And one of the authors said that, what is the persona of today international law? And today international law, it is a critic. He is a third world critic. He says that today international law is a capitalist white man, and who is, in fact, he is heterogeneous. So the point is that when you have this thing, you can have a dominant force there, male, and heterogeneous, second. And third important thing is a white man. So always if the persona of international law that can be imagined like this, and we are just giving an idea that Eurocentric law is a hegemonic apparatus. And it serves only one set of people. It doesn't serve the other set of people. If it doesn't serve other set of people, especially the marginalized, and why should you follow that? Then that theory comes, that a cosmopolitanism, another theory that says that states are irrelevant and it is a globalization, human rights, and civil society are matters, not states anymore. That means what? The fundamental principle of international relations and law, sovereignty, from there, they want to depart. So these things you have to see that nothing is wrong about this. The legalism versus realism is not wrong. Positivist definition is not wrong. And again, the mixture of unarticulated formalism is not wrong. Then it is decolonizing international law, that theory is also not wrong. Where it is wrong is that if you are splitting everything and make it and focusing on only one thing, that it is only the theory is important, not the doctrines. If you just select that way and teach international law, I am sure some of the universities are doing it in India and elsewhere, but that kind of thing will not give you a balanced view to a student. Because a teacher must himself understand that it is not the balanced view. Because the Eurocentric law, you have to confront the law. And when, at the same time, when the Eurocentric law is a reality, that Eurocentric law you have to face. No doubt, you have an ambition that, you want to just change the law in a different way that is beneficial to the marginalized people of the third world. That's fine. But at the same time, it is not reality. The existing law prompts something different, and then you have to engage them also. When you engage them, then you have to just, rely upon only the positivist doctrines. So I would say that it is the buffet of eclecticism. The international law today is a buffet with eclecticism. Because all shades of international law is there, and you have to mixture in such a way that it should reflect what the nature of international law today. That is very important. Now, let us go now for the tools and how the teaching is really, we are preparing ground for that, what will you do? The first is the preparatory phase. The preparatory phase, first you plan the curriculum. Now the point is the curriculum planning and syllabus in the federal universities and most of the universities in India, the curriculum planning and syllabus, it is not done by the teacher by himself. But certain universities in India, say for example, OP Jindal, and most of the universities in foreign countries, I would say all of them, what they do is the setting a syllabus is given to the teacher. It is a teacher's privilege. When he just frame the syllabus and he would just decide what are the content of law he is going to teach. And what is the methodology that he will decide. When he decides, there is a peer group within the university itself where all the international law teachers will be there. And before them, whoever proposes a new syllabus and he has to defend the syllabus. When he defends the syllabus, he would come with enough scholarship to explain why he wants this to be changed. So that way, the syllabus is framed. Then after the syllabus and curriculum planning, there are other things you have to see. One is the teaching manual and journal. The teaching manual is a manual that you are explaining how you are going to teach each unit of it. And the journal, well, you break down even the each unit per week and each and every day lecture, what will you teach? So that will be there in your journal. And you identify before even start of the course, reading materials, case books, textbooks, relevant websites of the institutions, then teaching journals. And the teaching journal is something, it is different from the journal that I am referring there in the third point. The teaching journal is perhaps, it is some completely like a logbook, what you do. Then short videos, arranging tutorial classes, interdisciplinary perception of international law. So all these things, you must be ready beforehand. But there is a caution here. That caution is that no textbook is written for the class you handle. Textbooks are alien to us first. Any good book you take it, and which is coming, whether it is a Antonio Cassisi's book, or N.M. Shah's book, or Ian Brownlee's book, or Anthony Oss' book. See, these are all, which are all completely like a treatise. So it is a single person's opinion. And he is putting it together to make it and reasonable. And the textbooks also, you have to see by dactyl, by experience only as a teacher, you will come to know. There are certain textbooks which are all used for, in the international law, that is used only for the political science people when they study international law. And they always, title not as international law, and they would be titled as law among nations. And similar way, there are international relations type of a book where, international law is taught as part of international relations, where the textbook's title would be different altogether. They call this as a foreign relations law. When they say foreign relations law, more of a political nature of the law that will come into play there, the foreign relations law. Then the typical book, they call the textbook of international law. So whichever, you have to be very careful because the textbooks are not reliable totally. And the case books are also not reliable in a place where you are teaching. The reason is that the textbooks and case books are origin-centric. where it originates, only to cater to the needs of the people where it originated, then they will. That's why you can find that the American books will have only the American case law, and the Australian books will have Australian case law. Canadian books like Elsie Green, and it will have only the Canadian case law. And you must understand one important thing, that international law, it looks one for us, but it is not one. The American practice of international law is called American international law. Australian practice of international law is called Australian international law. Indian practice of international law is called Indian international law. And the European practice of international law is called European international law. So what happens is, it is not that international law can be studied only from the point of view of what is international law underlies. And we are studying international law that is flowing from the international institutions, and that will have almost a universal application. And certain international law practice, that is only the state war interpretations, and certain regional practice, it is a regional interpretation. And India is concerned, India in international law is completely different. So the applicability of the international law principles, you must understand that there is a universal interpretative community of international law. There is a national interpretative community of international law. There is a regional interpretative community of international law. When all these things put together, you can sometimes get a commonality. When those common principles, you can always find that, and these principles are very important to be taught. So you have to make very, very, very careful choice, which is the appropriate thing to be told to your students. So reliance need not be placed on textbook alone. Now, so the customization of materials for a group one teaches, that is important. And you must know that in any given classroom, even if you say that it is a Harvard, Cambridge, or Yale, 30% reach is ideal. Any teacher can reach only to 30% of the students. Rest of them, he cannot reach at all. But however, you are a teacher for all in the class, and all of them must experience the impact of your teaching. So the reception is, clear reception is about 30%, and the other person must also feel that it is beneficial to attend the class. So for that purpose, you have to design appropriate pedagogy. And what is this appropriate pedagogy? And the teaching method, it is an appropriate teaching method that you can use it. So there are different sense of teaching. One is practice. That is a teaching practice. Second is teaching role. And third is teaching activity. In all the three senses, hegemony should be avoided in the classroom. This is a major problem with Indian teaching style as well as academia, I understand. That means what? Either by practice or by role or by activity, you always, the teacher will assign that they are higher up than that of the students. But it is not true. Why it is not true? You may know a few things and somebody knows some other things, but at the same time, and you are not, or myself not, absolutely say that, this is what it is. So what happens is, in the classroom, you have to set in a kind of a dialogue process between the teacher and the taught, and to have the dialogue process on, the interaction on, it is very important that you have to come down from the hegemonistic upper pedestal. You should be treated yourself equivalent even to the student. So that is important, because a student, today's learning is no longer a teacher-centric learning. And today's learning is an information-centric learning. But how you use this information in a fruitful way, a student may not be knowing, but you will be knowing. Therefore, you have to guide through, and you have to guide them through the process that, and they will be directed in a right way to understand things. then that's why, the classroom must provide a dialogue between the teacher and the taught, and that is very important. Then what is pedagogy? We are talking about pedagogy, and pedagogy is only the teaching method, but what is the purport of it? It implies understanding of what is appropriate and what is inappropriate knowledge. Knowledge is everywhere, but you have to just, take only the appropriate knowledge, right? To impart through education and includes an animated ethos in a pedagogy. Now, this is very important. The reason is that the international law is highly political. If it is highly political, if you can discuss in the classroom only all the days of the semester, only the politics in international law and politics of international, you can do always. But that is not a good thing to do, because you impart through education some knowledge. And that some knowledge, you can say that, there are two things. One is the epistemological, the other one is ontological. What is epistemological? Because already there is a stored knowledge and chain. You have to link the students. What is the ontology? What is happening today? On that basis, learning should be there. So all the two things must, synchronize when you are bringing in and giving to them. There are limitations as well as the learning of the student is concerned. There are in 4 different ways that learning that happens. One is auditory, the second is visual, and third is tactual, and the fourth is kinesthetic. That means, auditory. Certain people only by words, they just resounding, words will resound, and they can always register in the cognitive form. The other one is visual. They capture visual more effectively than the auditory. Then other one is a tactual. That is, it is completely seeing movements in the screen, and they will make them awake and see that. Then kinesthetic, that is the obtaining information from when it is simulated in a simulated condition. When there is a simulations, presentations and videos, and they will understood in a better way. So in the all different ways, it can be integrated in such a way that you can give the auditory, visual, tactual, and kinesthetic. All these things put together should be your methodology. If you want to do your methodology, you must have a kind of a very smart classroom and methodology and its limitations. Now, what is the problem here? And some of the, the government institutions, and it is very difficult to have that kind of even the smart classroom. Everyone has a smart classroom. But at least, 1 or 2 smart classrooms, they can have it. And for the subjects like international law, they can use this smart classroom, because the technological driven world, if you are not making use of it, and it is very difficult, because your student, what they could always easily understand, that will not be, for them anymore when only a teacher is talking to them. That means, it is only the auditory things that is happening. The rest of the things doesn't happen. So what is the technology-driven teaching methods? And I have given, it is a kind of a long shopping list here. One is the material collection. I told you already, it is a hand-picked materials that is important. Don't rely upon too much on the textbook as well as the casebook. And you have to provide all these things. But at the same time, first, you must be a good researcher, and you have to find out which thing can be shared with the students, so that they have to understand very easily. It must evoke response from them. And you have to set in a kind of a dialogue process. And it must be, in fact, what happens is a mutually beneficial one. And there is a two-way traffic that is possible. Then posting the materials in advance. Now, this is possible, you can send by email, and you can share it with a WhatsApp group. So posting the materials in advance is a possibility. Then the other mode is what we have been doing it now, that PowerPoint. PowerPoint. Then websites. You can create website even for your own class. You can create a website. You can post it there. And social media may be useful for asking questions and making comments. And you have to make, your own group, international law group like this. And discussion groups can be organized. Between the students, you can create a discussion groups, and whatever discussed, and they can come for discussion. And somebody can lead when the class is on. And the passiveness of students need to be broken. That is very important. If the classroom is not interactive, then teaching is not happening there. Someone must be there to filter through the questions. If there are so many questions and somebody needs to just filter through, like, when we are in a webinar, the questions are asked, all of them will collect it, and they will just select it and order it, classify it. And if it is 100 questions are there, they can convert it into 5 questions. They will ask the speaker, because when he answers that everything is answered. It is like that. The reality and entertainment becomes thinner, because between the reality and entertainment, this value that becomes thinner today. Okay, because that's why the most of the things are shared in the media. Then Moodle is the best example, because we have Moodle. I understand that even the law schools, the law colleges may have Moodle. Moodle is a very interesting platform. You can put everything there, including even short videos and the selected articles. And many things can be done there. Even the responses also can come. The other one is the blended teaching. The blended teaching is both, blending the offline and online teaching together. And you can go for the offline for some time and online for some other time. Then experiential learning. And what are all the experiential learning? Moot court is an experiential learning. Role play is an experiential learning. Law clinic, human rights and refugees is experiential learning. Then interview. Student is taking interview with one judge of ICJ, and student is taking, he is speaking with one reputed scholar who is a professor, and then he is taking interview. And that kind of interactive sessions would be helpful. Then setting roundtable, where the cross-section of ideas flows and people are just listening to it, and they are, in fact, that evoke questions, a lot of questions in them. They can do that. Okay. Then online teaching itself. Then recorded video. You have a lot of platforms, NPTEL, SWAYAM, Coursera, Khan's Laboratory. There are so many platforms today. So it is a video. Interestingly, you can just put 3-dimensional one there. And that is possible because, that would be helpful. People who just, see the visuals and they learn, they can do that. Then training module and exercise module also can be created, and that can be, given. Then teaching methods. As I told you, the role play in dispute resolutions are important. In fact, in one session, I have, the international water courses class. There were 20 students there in Jindal. And in the whole course, the final examination was a negotiation of water sharing of international water courses. That means all the 20 students are 20 states. They are riparian states. And they have different, in fact, needs. The drinking water, then they need, there are so many needs to safeguard their environment. And they need, and more, to safeguard their interest on agriculture. So the different needs are there, and the conflicting needs, how you can accommodate them. So final examination was that you negotiate an agreement on the basis of your needs. Then once they negotiated the agreement, that the negotiated agreement was given to us. The entire negotiation process, I was there assessing that. So that was a final examination. So the role play will work for dispute resolution and negotiations. And this is really, really very interesting. And people will be very active and they want to learn so much from outside also before you are coming for the negotiation. Then problem seminar, where each week a problem can be written by a teacher and assigned to student for their arguments. Then human rights and refugee law, there is a possibility of if it is an international law clinical program. So these are all the teaching methods that you can always have that. Now we are in the era of virtual reality and how to use the virtual reality. And recently, I have seen that, the Nuvals introduced, Sunny was telling on the other day that they have introduced a gamification. A gamification is a kind of a, the methodology by which they want to teach law. And recently, on February 21st, the British Institute of Comparative and International Law, they conducted a virtual seminar where the idea was floated that the international law can be taught by gamification. It is by creating virtual reality. That means the students will play the game, understand, in the platform. So what are all you need this, the gamification. And the gamification is also, in fact, a role play. And one must have a deep learning capacity, soft skills. And if it is a 10 teams or even small teams will be workable because it needs a lot of, the electronic gadgets for that matter. So you have to have a software with the computer graphics and gaming platform, and that the VR labs, the virtual reality labs will be there. And, you can do that. Then one may ask how you can do that. Say, for example, it is important that where the field action is there and a field action needs to be directed by law, you can always bring in the gamification. Say, imagine a situation, it is a conflict situation, whether it is a non-international armed conflict or an armed conflict. And one side is fighting against the other side. And in the gamification, all the structures can be brought very easily in graphics. If it is a mountainous terrain or a school building, a hospital building, a bridge, it is going to be bombarded. And who are all inside of the building, whether the combatants are there or the children are there. And all these things can be brought in the gamification. So when this is there, it will have, 3, 4 people, they are playing the role. Maybe 5 and 6, you can do that. Who are all the 4 people in the gamification? First is Army A. Second is Army B. And third is the legal advisor of Army A. Fourth is the legal advisor of B. Then they are getting instruction according to the humanitarian law when actual war is going on there. Then you can find the ICRC and other support groups. So all these things can be in action. The thing that can be brought under the virtual reality so that the student can learn what are the roles of the law, role of law in matters of conflict situation. So all your, 1949 convention, AP1, AP2, all these things will come into play. So this is the latest methodology that really, in fact, is much more, deliberated in the webinars. Now it is a questioning time. I have not gone into the content of law because that is a completely a different ball game altogether. I don't want to do that. Therefore, my first presentation is over. If you need now anything to be asked, you can raise the questions now.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Sir has very well highlighted the changing nature of the international law and how as a teacher we are supposed to cope up with the changing nature of law. And sir has also highlighted how we can induce the practical approach into teaching international law with the help of role play, problem solving methods, and also the clinical program. Thank you once again, sir. As always, your session is hugely informative, thought-provoking, and inspirational one for young faculties like us. And it's always a pleasure to hear, sir. So moving on to the question and answer session, sir. So we have few questions, very few questions from our audience, sir. So first one is, a good teacher must tell what the law ought to be rather than what the law is. So whether it is correct way to exclude the value-based studies such as theology and general philosophy, how can we sow the seeds of justice and humanity in the minds of students?
No, see, the what law ought to be, no doubt it is an issue. But in fact, you know, the normative domain, what it ought to be is a normative. But in the normative domain, it would be aspirational. So that is why I said that if you don't focus only on doctrines, you work on theory also. If you work on theory, that what ought to be. Say, for example, those people, I don't know, because, you know, the old timers on international law, even today, the researchers, they know about 3 important documentation. And these days, nobody looks for that. One is the new international economic order. The other one is Charter of Rights and Duties of States. Okay. Then Declaration of Legal Principles of States. These 2 documents, if you see that, which are all aspirational in character because it is normative in the sense that they want the law to be changed because they visualize that what the law ought to be. So a teacher also can work on that if he works on a theory, where the lacuna is there, why the law is. See, so for example, the bad aspect of positivism is positivism considers like any other law, international law is also law, therefore international law is neutral. But realism says that international law is not neutral. Because the international law is not neutral, the reason being that the present international law is completely written on liberal canvas. So people want really aspire something different totally. They apply and see the international law from the critical angle. When they see the critical angle, many things will come. It is, you say that it is a critical angle, and all the, you know, the Westerners, they would say that it is not a critical angle, it is a new Marxism. So you call them new liberalism, they say that it is a new Marxism. And with the result, what happens is that it is only the blame game that is going on. Or from one side, they blame that, you know, the existing order is, you know, a completely ethnocentric order. The existing order is only Eurocentric order, like that. But what is important, you see that the old law, the customary law, when they say that it is Eurocentric in character, you can't reject totally that amidst of the realism versus, you know, the legalism. You can always find that there are some tilt that has been made. And that is part of the corpus of international law today. Say, for example, when you say that it is Eurocentric, why you talk about today MFN, Most Favored Nations clause? Why you talk about today GSP, Generalized Preference System? When if it is Eurocentric, why do you talk about concepts like, you know, the common but differentiating responsibility? When it is Eurocentric, why do you talk about it is a common heritage of mankind? So the point is, you know, you cannot say that the law has not changed. You can say that law has changed, but it has not effectively changed as you like it. If you have taken that kind of a stand, it is okay. So the point is that The normative order, you can always think that, what you want the law to be, if international law. You can always say so. And it requires a lot of research. The researchers are only doing that, I suppose. I think this answers the question that I asked.
Yes, sir. So going to the second question, how far the international law has attained the humanistic approach? As a teacher, how I contribute in this regard?
No, see, the international law is humanistic as long as all human beings are treated equal. And before 1950s, you can't think that we are a situation where all human beings were treated equal. The idea is there, all human beings by birth, they are treated equal. The idea was there. But they were not treated equal. When they were not treated equal, they always thought that, certain rights should be given only on the basis of race. Certain rights should be given only on the basis of color. I'm not telling something different. If you see the history of human rights, and you can find that it's all first to start with the fraternity part that has come from the French Declaration. And life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that comes from the Declaration of Independence from USA. In the same country, you know that a Dred Scott case, and the case where people who are all familiar, they know that a Negro was treated as chattel, not as human being. So the exclusion happens within their social structure. In our country, exclusion has happened long back. That is why we say that social justice is needed. And exclusion happens in any country on the basis of anything. Apartheid was there, practiced for a long time in South Africa. So the point is, it is changing. The world is changing, but the world is changing very slowly. But at the same time, all the international lawyers should be the agents of change. So you have to talk about it openly instead of just accepting something.
Yes, sir. So the next question is, sir, could you point out the effective research areas for the international law, please?
No, this is a very, very, very tricky question because I can't suggest anything. Because a research for me, somebody is really interested in that. It is something like, do you like to marry A or B? Because you must have really heart of heart, some liking for the subject, isn't it? And I can't say that, you marry somebody. No, it's not like that. The research area is somebody has to conceive, we must be interested in that. And for what reason he is interested, that is different. The professors like me, what we do is, all right, it is good that you have selected, but you have selected on the basis of a very, very small range of research. That's not sufficient. You have to get into deeper. I'll tell you the research story, because, I did one of the toughest guide, PhD guide, Professor T.S. Ramarao. I was a full-time scholar. Yeah, people are afraid when I will be trampling to get into his room. Chokalingam knows well, I think. And most of the professors from law college, they never go there. They'll come there, they just stand in the corridor. Is he there? Yes, he is there. They'll run away. And but every day I go there, we will discuss something, we will come back. After 6 months of my registration, he asked my question, what is the area of your research? I said that, sir, I am so much interested in looking into the implementation of the international economic and social covenant. And he said that there is no mechanism, though so far, established for that. You must understand that I was awarded in '92 my PhD. So, when all these things were all in rudimentary stage, okay, then he says that, all right, you look into that anyway. Then I report back after 2 months, review. He said, what did you find? Yes, sir, you said rightly, it is useless. One cannot write so much on that because nothing is available at that time, because there was no committee, nothing. Just only, it is there, only the convention that has been adopted. Then what are you going to do? Sir, there is another agenda, very interesting, because I am following the ECOSOC as well as UN General Assembly. What is the agenda? I said that the other methods of implementing economic, social, and cultural rights. Is it? Yes, sir. So how many resolutions so far has come on that? That comes 3-4 resolutions. Do you think that that is a possibility that it will have some scope? Let me study and come back. Then I studied those things also. Then I studied, I found out after 1.5 years. What's your finding? I said that my finding is a little different, sir. What? And they are trying to just, link it with the implementation of economic and social cultural rights by structural change and by programs. Interesting. Maybe, you would have read everything there so far. Yes, I read everything, sir. And what do you think of, if these things are there, you found out all these things. What's the interesting thing that you can contribute? Then I said that, let me see, sir. Then I have just scanned through all the Economic and Social Council resolutions. The first resolution on right to development was there. And the first resolution on right to development in ECOSOC, that was completely absorbed almost all the aspects that I have discussed. Implementation of economic and social rights, first. Second, integrating new international economic order. Third, integrating within the permanent sovereignty over natural resources. Fourth, integrating into the Charter and economic rights and duties. Fifth, finally, Declaration of Social Progress and Development. Then he said that, all right, it is only one resolution has come. Do you think that, this will ever emerge as a concept? Of course, sir. Already go ahead, you write, you do one right to develop. When there was only a first resolution and second resolution in Economic and Social Council. When I submitted, at the time the declaration was out, right to development. And I was able to write commentary for every article, like what ILC would do. I did my commentary. And I have just put it that, what is the prospects and reality? Because, the same thing, what? Legalism versus realism. What is the prospects and reality? So, it is your work must be very standard work if you want. Just for, some academic thing, the promotion, you want to do it, you can do it in any way. That's a different matter altogether. But if you want to do in a very reasonable way, you want to do, that is where, your heart will be fulfilled, that you have made a significant contribution to the existing knowledge. That is the purpose of research. Then if that is the case, and you have to work very detailedly, I will tell you, whatever as a research scholar I read at the time, that was a sea of books that was sufficient for lifetime. And after that, you are only updating, that's all. So nothing is left out. Wherever it is published, it will be on my table. And it was very interesting because the professor was a well-known man internationally, because he was an editor for the Journal of International Affairs, Yearbook of International Affairs. And most of the books will come for book review. So it is easy. You can have a very good access and a very good professor, because he is no nonsense. Nobody can go to him unless and otherwise, you just trash everything. You go there and sit 30 minutes. That will be very good for that, because he doesn't entertain otherwise, because he's a busy man at the time. So this is my research experience. Therefore, I said, don't ever follow anybody says that what is the research topic. This is your headache. You have to find out. You can check with your professor or a known person, a scholar, whether this is viable for PhD. And today you can yourself search it on the particular topic and how many of them really published this thing. You can find out. There are a Google Scholar, there are ResearchGate, there are so many places where you can just, in the network, you can find that whether that work has been done or not. So far, to my knowledge, nobody did PhD in international law, especially on right to development. One LLM thesis that was accepted, and that was some 8 years back from South Africa. Any other question?
Yes, sir. The next question is, should international law teacher be a realist or an idealist?
So idealism is, I think, idealism belongs to ethics. Idealism it doesn't belong to lawyer, I would say. Because you can't take idealist position because nothing is idealist. And that too, all the governments, they are making law and you have absolutely no control with that. How would be you are an ideal? And then you are an ideal, you are creating your own world. And perhaps that world can just go for a kind of a film storyline, that's all. But you cannot be an idealist. And you can be a realist, no doubt about that. But ideal is what? Idealism is something different from idealist. Idealism of international law is only what? It is a peace through law. That is the only idealism. International law through peace. So how will you reach that? The peace through law. That is the idealistic position. And everybody follows it, it's okay. Peace will prevail. But it is difficult to make every state to behave the same way.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And then the next question. As a teacher, how judgments of international courts be analyzed while teaching international law and relevant subjects?
No, see, this is a very disputed area. As a teacher, you have to read and have knowledge over all the decisions, with knowing that all the decisions will not be helpful to say what the international law today is. The reason I will tell you, when all the decisions you look, all the decisions are contextualized. And no decision will lay a fundamental principles like. It is not like a tart court, it will just lay down a fundamental principle. And whatever, they decide by the court, the ICJ, it doesn't bind on the court itself in the next case. So it will be taken as only a respectable opinion given by respectable international lawyers. That's all. So what I am telling is that your thing is essential because you have to study international law. If you happen to argue before International Court of Justice, or you are writing brief for them, then your court decisions are important. They won't depart from that. Understand?
Yes.
But
yes.
whatever the court says, that is not international law. International law is completely fragmented. International law is completely fragmented, and you offer certain justification for your act. For that, the law would be a justification, and law would be just making your behavior is acceptable. So that need not come all the time only from the judicial decisions. And some of the judicial decisions, perhaps for today's world, it won't applicable at all. Some of the decisions. Some of the decisions, old decisions, say for example, every old decisions that may not have any application today. Why? Because some of the laws, that is pronounced by the judiciary, that has been completely changed over 360 degrees by treaty provisions. At the time it was there, fine, but today it is not there. What will you do? Understand?
Yes, sir.
So it is very limited. Say, for example, let me state another thing. The major issue in very famous case, the Nicaragua versus US, is US said that you are a party to the UN convention. You are party to the UN charter. Non-intervention principle is an accepted principle. Then why just you have violated it? US said that I am not party to that kind of a thing in the treaty between Nicaragua as well as where? The US. In the treaty, it was not mentioned that you have to go only by treaty. Court said that by customary international law, I hold you responsible. US walked out, went away. See, the simple point is that it has a lot of legitimate force when the decision is given. But it doesn't make the states obligatory to obey the decision. In most of the cases, if you see that, after the decision, on the basis of decision, agreement is reached between the states. It never goes to the, very rarely it goes to the Security Council for implementation. And most of the time, it is always after that, after the decision is rendered, the parties will join together and they will come to a conclusion. And the lines, what has been decided there. But they won't agree simply that it is an international court, a world court, therefore. So the world court, you are referring it and you are just mesmerizing people in the classroom. You may create and evoke a kind of initial euphoria, but at the same time, when those people just see what is the character of the judgment and other things, and they will not give any time to that.
Yes, sir. Sir, last question. This question is from the core subject. Sir, is there any mechanism to impose sanctions on a permanent member of the Security Council, keeping in mind their veto power?
Yeah, you made it very clear that they have a veto power. You cannot make it. You cannot make it.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for patiently answering to all the questions, sir. And you have given a clarity to those young faculties who are about to do their PhD in selecting their research area. So once again, thank you, sir, for accepting our invite in your busy schedule and also for your presence in the inaugural function, sir. We were very happy that sir were part of the inaugural function. And all of us are fortunate enough to hear, sir, today with your rich experience and knowledge, sir. Thank you once again, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. I like to spend my time with, the young scholars as well as the teachers, because if we want, anything to contribute, we can do that, because that itself is a good opportunity. Thank you very much for giving that opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank
there
you.
are 4 generations of teachers here, sir. Sir, the first generation, Adilasa the second, myself the third, and Kritika the fourth, and Kritika and all other resident professors, sir. So 4 generations of teaching fraternity here, sir.
It's interesting. I started my teaching in 1982.
Wonderful, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Dealer, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, dear sir. Thank you, Gandhi.
Thank you.